I still can't believe this actually happened to me. It's been months and I still get chills when I think about it. I know how it sounds. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. But it's real. Every terrifying second of it. It all started with a speaker. Just a regular Bluetooth speaker. Nothing fancy. I picked it up at this little electronics shop tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in my neighborhood. The store looked like the kind of place that sells off-brand phone chargers and cheap headphones, but I needed something small and decent for playing music in my apartment. The guy behind the counter was an older man with glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He barely looked up from his newspaper when I brought the speaker to the register. The whole transaction lasted maybe 2 minutes. No small talk, no upselling. Just cash, receipt, and I was out the door. For 2 weeks, everything was normal. The speaker worked fine. I used it mostly in the evenings when I was cooking or cleaning. The sound quality was actually better than I expected. If I had known what was coming, I would have smashed that thing to pieces the second I brought it home. It started on a Thursday night. I remember because I had work early the next morning and had gone to bed earlier than usual. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I shot awake to the most gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard in my life. For a second, I thought it was coming from outside. I live in a small apartment building in a quieter part of town, but weird things happen everywhere. Maybe someone was being attacked. My heart was hammering in my chest as I sat up and grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. Then it happened again. The same scream, raw and distorted, filling my entire apartment. That's when I realized it was coming from inside my bedroom. I scrambled out of bed, my whole body shaking. My first thought was my phone. Maybe it was some kind of emergency alert. But my screen was dark. No notifications. Then I noticed the faint blue glow coming from my dresser. The speaker. But it wasn't even on. I knew I had turned it off before bed. The power light was off, but somehow the sound was blasting from it. The scream came again, louder, sharper. My stomach dropped. It sounded less like a person and more like something being tortured. It made my skin crawl like nails on a chalkboard, but 10 times worse. I lunged forward and grabbed the speaker, fumbling to turn it off, even though it already was. Nothing changed. The scream still echoed through my bedroom, filling every corner. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I stood there frozen, the speaker gripped in my hand so tightly my fingers ached. I waited, barely breathing, for something else to happen. But the apartment was dead quiet. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I must have stood there for a solid 5 minutes, too scared to move. Finally, I pulled the plug from the wall. Just in case. I even took the battery out. No power source at all. I barely slept that night. Every creak, every tiny noise had me jumping. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I convinced myself it was some kind of bizarre malfunction. A glitch. Speakers could do weird things, right? Maybe it had picked up interference or some freaky radio signal. That made sense. I told myself that over and over until I believed it. That is, until the next night. Because that was when things got even worse. I barely made it through the next day. I was exhausted, jittery, and kept replaying the scream over and over in my head. Every time I thought about it, my stomach twisted. But I kept telling myself it had to be some kind of malfunction. I even considered throwing the speaker away right then and there, but part of me felt stupid for being scared of an electronic device. I should have listened to my gut. That night, I made sure the speaker was unplugged and the battery was out. I even stuffed it into a drawer under some clothes as if that would somehow make a difference. Then I climbed into bed, determined to get some real sleep. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I remember was waking up to a sound. A low crackling static. It was soft at first, just barely loud enough to register in my half-asleep brain. But then it grew. Louder. Harsher. Like a detuned radio stuck between stations, but deeper. Rougher. I bolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs. My room was dark except for the faint glow from the window, just the streetlight outside. The sound was coming from the dresser again. From the drawer. The speaker was inside. Unplugged. Battery removed. But somehow it was on. The static crackled and popped, swelling and shifting like something was trying to form words through it. My skin prickled with goosebumps. The air in my room felt different. Heavier. As if something was watching me. I was frozen, gripping the edge of my blanket so hard my knuckles went white. I wanted to get up, to grab the speaker and throw it against the wall, but I couldn't move. The noise filled my head, buzzing and humming in a way that made me feel sick. And then just as I finally worked up the nerve to move, it stopped. Dead silence. The air felt lighter again, like something had left. I sat there breathless, staring at the drawer. I don't know how long I stayed like that before I forced myself out of bed. My whole body was trembling as I yanked the drawer open. The speaker sat there perfectly still. No light, no sound. Just an ordinary, lifeless object. I grabbed it with both hands, half expecting it to burn me, but it was cool to the touch. I turned it over, pressing the power button. Nothing. It was still off. I should have smashed it right then and there. But instead I stuffed it back into the drawer and slammed it shut. I told myself I'd return it the next day. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could still hear the static, faint and distant, like it was waiting for me. And when morning finally came, I grabbed the speaker, threw on some clothes and rushed straight back to the shop. That's when I found out it was closed. Not just for the day. For good. The walk to the electronics shop felt like a lifeline. I was gripping the speaker so tightly my fingers ached, my body running on pure adrenaline and zero sleep. The cold morning air did nothing to wake me up. I was already wired, my mind replaying the night over and over. It had to be defective. That was the only explanation. Maybe there was a hidden battery inside I didn't know about. Maybe it was picking up stray signals, some weird radio interference. I needed an answer. More than that, I needed to get rid of it. When I turned the corner onto the street, my stomach sank. The shop was dark. The metal security shutter was pulled down over the entrance, locked up tight. No closed sign, no hours posted. Just a single handwritten note taped to the front of the door. Closed until further notice. I stared at it, my breath fogging in the cold air. What the hell? I tried peeking through the glass, but the inside was pitch black. Shelves still lined the walls, but I couldn't tell if they were full or empty. I knocked once, twice. No answer. This didn't make sense. I had just been here 2 weeks ago. The place had looked normal. Maybe a little rundown, but definitely open. Now it felt abandoned. I knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed down the empty street. Nothing. I took a step back, gripping the speaker, frustration bubbling up through my fear. Was this some kind of scam? Had the guy sold me a defective speaker and then skipped town? But that didn't explain what had happened. Electronics don't just turn on by themselves. I looked around, hoping to find someone who knew what was going on. The street was quiet, the only sign of life being the laundromat next door. The place was mostly empty, just a single old man reading a newspaper inside. I pushed open the glass door, the bell jingling overhead. The smell of detergent and warm air hit me instantly. The man barely glanced up. I hesitated, then approached him. Hey, do you know what happened to the electronics shop next door? He flipped a page. Closed. Yeah, I saw that, I said, trying not to sound impatient. But do you know why? It was open 2 weeks ago. This time he did look up. His face was lined, tired, like someone who had seen too much in life to care about anything anymore. That place, he muttered, shaking his head, should have been shut down a long time ago. My skin prickled. What do you mean? The old man sighed, folding his newspaper and setting it on his lap. He studied me for a moment, then flicked his gaze down to the speaker in my hands. You bought something from there, didn't you? I swallowed hard. Yeah, a speaker. His expression darkened. Take it back. I blinked. I what? I just told you the shop is closed. Then throw it away, he said firmly. Get rid of it. Now. His sudden shift in tone sent a chill through me. The laundromat was still warm, humming with the sound of spinning machines, but I felt cold all over. What's wrong with it? I asked, gripping the speaker tighter. The man exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. Listen, kid. That place has always been strange. The guy who ran it never really talked to anyone. Came and went at odd hours. People would buy things from there and then... He hesitated, lowering his voice. Things would happen. My mouth went dry. What kind of things? The man shook his head. Weird shit. Electronics acting up. Sounds coming from nowhere. A woman down the street bought a radio there once. Said she kept hearing voices at night, whispering in a language she didn't understand. She tried to return it, but the shop was closed. 2 weeks later, she moved out. I felt a cold sweat creeping along the back of my neck. You're saying the shop sells haunted stuff? The old man snorted. I don't know about haunted, but I know it ain't right. He leaned in slightly. You want to keep that thing, that's your business. But if I were you, I'd smash it to pieces and throw it as far away as possible. I swallowed, glancing down at the speaker. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was stupid. It was just a speaker. Just a piece of plastic and wires. There had to be a rational explanation for all of this. But another part of me, the part still rattled from the scream and the static, wasn't so sure. I nodded stiffly. Thanks. The old man just grunted and went back to his newspaper. I walked out of the laundromat, my heart pounding. The street felt eerily empty now, like I had stepped into a different version of reality. I looked down at the speaker in my hands. I should throw it away. I should. But something stopped me. Something gnawed at the back of my mind. Because if this thing was truly just a broken piece of junk, then why did it feel like it was waiting for me? I walked home gripping the speaker, my mind racing. The old man's words stuck with me. Throw it away. Smash it to pieces. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. Maybe it was stupid, maybe I was just being stubborn, but part of me needed to know what was going on. I needed proof. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun was setting. The sky outside was painted with streaks of orange and pink, but my room felt darker than usual. Or maybe it was just me. I set the speaker on my desk and stared at it. It just sat there. Silent. Harmless. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I plugged it in. No lights, no sound. The thing was completely dead. And yet, I knew it wasn't. I didn't even try to sleep that night. I left the lamp on, sat up in bed, and waited. Every little sound in the apartment made my skin crawl, the hum of the fridge, the distant rumble of a car outside, the creak of the wall settling. I kept glancing at the speaker, my breath shallow, my hands gripping the blankets. Then at exactly 3 a.m. it started. A single, sharp click. Like a microphone turning on. Then the static. Low crackling, shifting. It rolled through the room like a thick fog, filling every corner. The same noise as the night before. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay still. I needed to know what was coming next. And then through the static I heard it. A voice. Whispering. At first it was just a murmur, too soft to make out. But it grew clearer, shaping itself into words. Come find me. I stopped breathing. The voice was wrong. Not robotic, not pre-recorded. It sounded real, too real. A man's voice, deep and smooth, but with an edge that made my skin prickle. Come find me. It was coming from the speaker. Even though it was still off. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, to throw the damn thing out the window, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like dead weight. Then the voice spoke again. Come to Blackwood Forest. My stomach dropped. Blackwood was a small, dense forest about 10 miles outside of town. I had only been there once years ago for a picnic with some friends. It wasn't exactly a popular spot, just a stretch of woods that barely anyone visited. Why there? My hands were slick with sweat. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's just a malfunction. Just a stupid, broken speaker. When I opened them, the static was gone. Silence. The air in my room was still heavy, thick with something I couldn't describe. I stared at the speaker. My hands were trembling. I should have thrown it away right then. I should have smashed it into a million pieces. But I didn't. Because deep down, past all the fear, past the overwhelming sense that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, was something else. Curiosity. A whisper in my own mind urging me forward. And before I could stop myself, I made a decision. I was going to Blackwood Forest. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to forget the speaker, to smash it, to throw it into the nearest dumpster and never look back. But I couldn't. I kept replaying the voice in my head. Come to Blackwood Forest. Why? I told myself I just wanted answers. That I needed to know what was really going on. But deep down, I knew the truth, something was pulling me there. So against every ounce of common sense I went. It was just past midnight when I arrived. Blackwood Forest sat just outside of town, past a stretch of empty roads and old, abandoned buildings. No streetlights. No signs. Just a dirt path leading into the trees. I parked my car at the edge of the woods and stepped out. The cold night air wrapped around me, thick and damp. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their branches whispering against each other like they were sharing a secret. I hesitated. I could still turn back, get in the car, drive home, pretend none of this ever happened. But I didn't. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped forward. The dirt path crunched beneath my boots as I walked. The further I went, the quieter everything became. The wind died. No birds. No insects. Just silence. Then, somewhere in the distance, I heard it. A voice. Low. Murmuring. Just ahead. My heart pounded against my ribs. I moved slower, my breath shallow. The trees grew thicker around me, their trunks gnarled and twisting in strange ways. Then I saw it. A faint glow flickering through the trees. Fire. I crept closer, my pulse hammering. And then through a break in the trees I saw them. A group of people, dressed in long dark robes, standing in a circle around a fire. I froze. I wanted to turn back to run, but my legs wouldn't move. One of them lifted their head. I ducked behind a tree, my chest tight. I peeked out again. They were chanting, low, rhythmic, in a language I didn't recognize. Shadows flickered against their hoods, stretching and twisting in the firelight. I felt sick. My hands were slick with sweat. My phone felt like a dead weight in my grip. Then, without warning, the chanting stopped. Silence. The fire crackled. And then all at once they turned, facing me. I barely had time to react before something slammed into the back of my head. A sharp white-hot pain exploded through my skull. And then, darkness. When I came to, I was lying on my back. The world swam around me, hazy and distant. My head throbbed. My arms and legs felt heavy. Then I heard it. The chanting. I forced my eyes open. I was in the middle of the circle. The fire roared beside me, casting eerie shadows across the figures standing around it. Their faces were hidden beneath their hoods, their voices low and guttural. My stomach lurched. I scrambled to sit up, but my limbs were weak, like I had been drugged. One of them stepped forward. A man. Tall. His robe was different from the others, embroidered with strange symbols. He reached into his robe and pulled something out. My breath caught in my throat. The speaker. The same one I had brought home. Only now it was on. A low static buzz from its surface. The man held it high. The chanting grew louder. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I lunged to my feet, ignoring the dizziness, and ran. The robed figures shouted behind me. Heavy footsteps pounded against the dirt. They were chasing me. My vision blurred, my heart slamming against my ribs as I tore through the trees. Branches clawed at my face, my arms, my legs. I didn't care. I just ran. The voices behind me grew fainter. The firelight disappeared. And then, I saw it. The road. I pushed myself harder, sprinting with everything I had left. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were going to give out. But I didn't stop. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. My hands fumbled for the keys. My fingers were shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas. As I peeled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures stood at the edge of the forest, watching me. But they didn't follow. They just stood there. And in the distance, just barely audible over the sound of my racing heartbeat, I heard the static. I barely slept that night. The next morning I called the police. I told them everything. They found nothing. No fire. No people. No signs that anyone had been in the forest the night before. I tried explaining about the shop, the speaker, the voice, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. In the end, they wrote it off as a prank. A bad dream. But I know what I saw. What I heard. I don't know what they were planning. What the speaker was for. What would have happened if I had stayed. But I do know one thing. I should have destroyed it when I had the chance. Now every night, right around 3 a.m., I still hear it. A faint crackling. Like static. Like it's waiting for me to listen. Again.